Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. Unsuspecting motorists tell a Florida jury how a former deputy allegedly planted drugs in their vehicles during traffic stops. One woman tears up as she describes how the false charge changed her life.
Didn't think I would be able to beat anything being it was law enforcement. And I wanted to go home and take care of my grandbaby.
The tiger on the loose in Houston, Texas. And why a man out on bond for a murder charge is back behind bars for fleeing.
I guess my client likes tigers.
And the judge's ruling paving the way for Derek Chauvin to be sentenced to a longer term in prison for the murder of George Floyd. Plus, 3 defendants charged in the death of Ahmaud Arbery want evidence from the victim's past shown to a jury at trial. Is the body cam footage of Arbery's run-in with law enforcement relevant?
You bothered me for nothing.
Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmire along with Terri Austin. A judge in Georgia is now considering whether Ahmaud Arbery's past encounters with law enforcement should be allowed into evidence for the upcoming trial of 3 defendants. Father and son Gregory and Travis McMichael are charged with murdering Arbery while he was out jogging last February. A third man, William Rhodey Bryan, is charged with boxing Arbery in while filming the incident. The defendants claim Arbery was a burglar running through their neighborhood. Prosecutors say the McMichaels were the aggressors and therefore can't claim self-defense. They're scheduled to stand trial in October. Now the defense wants the jury to hear about Arbery's past criminal incidents, including when Arbery was arrested for bringing a loaded gun to a high school basketball game in 2013.
Yeah, that there was an individual that had been observed with a gun, was given his description, and was advised over the radio, I learned over the radio, that he had exited the gym and was running away. The lieutenant challenged him at the door, said, stop, I need to talk to you. And at that point in time, he ran out the door, ran away from the officer, refused to comply with the officer's command to stop, I need to talk to you. Ran out the door and ran away from multiple officers there until he got to my position, where I tried to apprehend him as well.
Okay. Did any of the officers try to put their hands on him or to physically restrain him?
Yes.
And what did Mr. Arbery do as a result of that?
He resisted, he ran and swiped their hands away and ran.
Did any of the officers get injured?
One of the officers was chasing him and fell, yes.
Okay. But no other physical signs of injury or scratches or anything like that?
No.
Defense attorneys are also trying to bring into evidence Arbery's conviction for shoplifting at a Walmart in 2017.
There were 4 black males who were confronted by the loss prevention officer who were trying to leave the scene as I was arriving.
And what did you understand the nature of the confrontation was?
That the suspect in question was trying to take out a Vizio 65-inch TV through the grocery side doors.
And by suspect in question, do you mean Mr. Arbery?
Yes.
Do you remember whether or not when you asked those individuals, and particularly Mr. Arbery, to stop walking, if Mr. Arbery stopped walking up on your command?
They did, and he did. However, Mr. Arbery was the only one who was vocal about it.
Okay, what do you mean by vocal?
He was a little confrontational. At first, he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to comply with sitting down. But after repeated requests, I'm not sure how many times I told him to sit down, they finally just did it. And I guess that was also when backup officers started to arrive.
And in a third incident, defense attorneys want to tell the jury about a tense confrontation Arbery had with police in 2017. Arbery was stopped in a parking lot and refused to let officers search his car. He was not arrested.
So what happened there in your estimation?
He approached me thinking I was going to go into his car, which I wasn't going to do. He approached me fast enough to the point where I actually had to physically push him away from me.
Okay. And what was the concern that you had at that moment?
The concern at that point was he was going to assault me.
Do you feel like his conduct was in fact assaultive already or not?
I think it was to a point, but at that point that was clear that it was an assaultive behavior. That one was.
Was this the first time somebody had used profanity with you?
That was the first time that somebody had acted that way with me, yes.
Okay,
That I can remember.
That was my question. Is that the first time someone had used profanity with you?
I believe so, yes.
A year and a half as a patrol officer and no one had used profanity with you?
De-escalation's a forte of mine.
Joining us today is the state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Ehrenberg and Terri Austin. Dave, a major legal battle here that I see at least is whether or not self-defense even applies for the defendants. Do you see self-defense here?
Good evening, Brian. I don't see self-defense here. These defendants were the initial aggressors. Arbery tried to avoid them. They confronted him with a shotgun, and he tried to get away. You don't get to shoot someone claiming self-defense when the person on the other side is trying to escape and may even use his fists. And so, no, I don't see self-defense as a defense here. I don't think that the court should allow it.
Yeah, that initial aggressor part, Dave, I think is really the clutch part there. Terri, and this whole business about bringing up Arbery's history, especially telling the police he can't be searched in a park and there being no arrest, where's the relevance? This just looks like an attempt to attack Arbery's character.
I couldn't agree with you more here, Brian. There's no question this looks like a character assassination. We know that prior bad acts are not supposed to be used unless they are showing intent or motive, and all of the acts they just talked about have nothing to do with what was going on here. He wasn't trying to steal anything. In fact, we have video of him inside the house they say they saw him in, and he wasn't trying to do anything. And clearly, being caught in a park, none of this has anything to do with what happened in this incident. In this incident, he was trying to save his life, as Dave just said. And, you know, to your point, Brian, you have to weigh the relevance with the prejudicial value. And of course, if anyone is listening to this, they are going to think to themselves that this is a bad guy. And so it's definitely character assassination.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Thank you both. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, Houston police are on the prowl as a search for a missing tiger continues. But first, the body cam footage allegedly showing a former deputy planting drugs on unsuspecting victim. The compelling testimony from Motorists next. We're back. A former Florida deputy is on trial for allegedly planting drugs on unsuspecting drivers. Prosecutors say the ex-cop's body cam video from one woman's traffic stop is damning evidence. February 15th, 2018. Teresa Odom was pulled over by then-deputy Zachary Wester for defective brake lights.
Did it have some problems with the lights?
No, sir.
During the stop, Wester asked to search the car. Odom complied.
I knew there was nothing in my car.
After a few minutes of searching, Wester came back with this.
Miss Odom.
It is yogurt, sir.
I know. Okay.
It's yogurt.
How about this, though?
That is not mine. No, sir.
Odom admits the spoon is hers, but says she was using it to eat yogurt. However, she says the plastic baggie and contents inside are not hers. The prosecution says the video from Odom's arrest is one of their strongest arguments for a conviction. The defense, however, says Odom is not credible.
And you have an attorney, and you've also filed a civil suit out of this incident, correct?
Yes, sir, I have.
Was it one crime of dishonesty you've been convicted of?
Yes.
Odom is not alone. There are over a dozen cases similar to hers, and for a number of those, Wester's body cam was off at the time of the vehicle search. Like many others, Odom entered a plea deal.
Because I just didn't think I would be able to beat anything being it was law enforcement. And I wanted to go home and take care of my grandbaby that was 3 months old.
Here to discuss the trial, the alleged drug planting ex-cop is State Attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Ehrenberg and Terri Austin. Now, Dave, this video seems to be the strongest for the prosecution. As you saw there, we kind of slowed it down just a little, and some of our viewers were asking why wasn't the prosecution doing that in this case? But you have an opinion on that. What do you think?
Yeah, you showed the video in its entirety and at regular speed, and then later you can slow it down. But it doesn't matter, I think, if you slow it down in front of the jury when you have 12 or more different victims here. I think at some point it's a little overkill. I mean, you've got so many victims and they're all saying the same thing. I think the prosecutors rely on their testimony as much as they would on the video. And this case is not going to be won or lost because the video was not slowed down.
I'd agree there. They've got so much there to work with. They maybe don't want to get lost in the trees from the forest. Now, Teresa Odom broke down when she talked about how this case affected her life. Did her testimony help the prosecution in the way she delivered it?
Absolutely, no question about it. She was an excellent witness. First of all, you saw her in the video, and she adamantly denied having any drugs. She said, "No, sir," and she meant that. And then you saw her on the stand. She broke down. She was holding her eyes and trying not to cry. It was really difficult. I think the juries could relate to her helplessness and to her frustration. And then, you know, she, remember, spent about 3 weeks in jail. There's no question that she should be bringing a civil action. She has damages here. Her reputation has been damaged. And just because she had past violations doesn't mean that she isn't telling the truth now. And this is such an abuse of authority. I hope that if the evidence shows it, and it looks like it is, that he really serves the time.
Yeah, and I think to Dave's point and also yours, there being such a volume of victims here, that might be able to cure, well, you're getting a civil suit here, you're doing this here. Well, there's 12 of them. I don't know how strong that argument's going to be. Thank you both. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, a cold case connection. How remains from Crystal Creek might be linked to a serial killer. Plus, how long will Derek Chauvin spend in prison? The latest ruling in the murder of George Floyd still ahead. Welcome back. Let's check in on some top legal stories making headlines at the Law and Crime Network. The Law and Crime Network is set to be the only camera in the courtroom when the highly anticipated murder trial of Robert Durst resumes this Tuesday. The New York real estate heir is accused of killing his best friend, Susan Berman, in her Los Angeles home in December 2000. Durst's trial had 3 days of openings and 10 witnesses take the stand before COVID-19 postponed the trial on March 12, 2020. The trial judge has repeatedly denied motions by the defense to declare a mistrial over the 14-month-long adjournment. The trial could last up to 6 months. Live gavel-to-gavel coverage begins on May 17th. In Georgia, prosecutors will seek the death penalty for the accused Atlanta area spa shooter if convicted. Robert Long is charged with going on a shooting spree that left 8 dead and another wounded at 3 spas. Long was indicted Tuesday on a dozen more charges, including hate crimes and domestic terrorism. Prosecutors are now accusing Long of targeting the victims for murder because of their, quote, actual or perceived race, national origin, sex, and gender. Prosecutors say the murders show an outrageously or wantonly vile, horrible, or inhumane depravity of mind. And out of Montana, the remains from a 1985 cold case may be linked to a serial killer. Janet Lee Lucas's remains were found near Crystal Creek by a bear hunter in 1985. Authorities are looking into Wayne Nance, aka the Missoula Mauler, because her remains were found near a 1984 cold case, which was recently linked to Nance. And now for the latest on Brian Ross Investigates, let's check in with our chief investigative correspondent.
Thanks, Brian. Coming up this week on Brian Ross Investigates, a troubling story about a place once thought to be one of the most wonderful summer camps anywhere in the country. But a new lawsuit brought by 2 former campers calls that into question.
The first time I was sexually assaulted by a male counselor was when I was 13. I was raped.
The people who run the camp say they are investigating, and they deny anyone tried to cover up any sex crimes. That's this week on Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. Brian, back to you.
Thanks, Brian. When we come back, a big cat is at large in a space city. And no, we're not talking about the Tiger King. We break down this new tiger tail and who police are saying could be facing jail time. Welcome back. A new ruling in the Derek Chauvin case paves the way for the former Minneapolis police officer to receive a longer sentence. Judge Peter Cahill ruled there were aggravating factors in the death of George Floyd. According to an order made public on Wednesday, Cahill found that Chauvin abused the position of trust and authority when he restrained Floyd in the prone position and did not render aid when Floyd became unresponsive. Cahill further found Chauvin treated Floyd with particular cruelty, that the defendant committed the crime as a group of 3 or more, and that children were present. Chauvin is scheduled to be sentenced on June 25th. He faces up to 40 years in prison. David Ehrenberg, let's imagine you're Keith Ellison, the Attorney General who handled this case. You just finished reading this decision from the judge. What's the thought process going forward now?
You're thinking about getting close to the 40-year max. And remember, it was Chauvin who decided to let the judge decide whether there were aggravating factors. They all have to be shown beyond a reasonable doubt, and the judge found that 4 of the 5 existed. So you're going to ask that same judge to now sentence the defendant too close to the maximum 40 years. We had a case here of an officer killing a black motorist, and we asked for life in prison. The judge gave 25 years. So they should ask for 40 years or somewhere near that.
All right, that makes a lot of sense, especially because, Terri Austin, Judge Cahill just needed one factor to depart from the recommended 150-month jail sentence. But with 4 factors, is Chauvin more likely to get the max, as Dave is suggesting?
I think he's going to get very close to the max. I mean, everyone is thinking from a legal perspective that because he's not had any priors, he's probably not going to get the max. But I do think because he's had all of these other aggravating factors, there's no question that he abused his trust and his authority. He did this in front of children. You know, it was particularly cruel, and watching the video, you could see all of that, and everyone could feel the impact of that. So I do think that it will add additional months to the sentence. I think probably close to 30 years. And I think the judge made the right decision. I mean, basically, he said that Chauvin wasn't in any sort of particular circumstances as far as George Floyd was concerned in terms of the condition of George Floyd, but he found everything else. And I think that that's important. I think he definitely thought that this deserved as much as he could under the sentencing guidelines to give as far a sentence as he could, as maximum as he could. And I think that's exactly what we will see when the sentencing actually occurs.
Yeah, so maybe a high ask from the prosecution here, but the judge coming just a little bit below that, somewhere in the 30, 35 mark. I know a lot of people have been discussing that as well. Thank you both for your input. Now to Texas, where the search is on in Houston for a tiger that's been on the loose for a couple of days. As Angenette Levy tells us, the man accused of owning the tiger says it doesn't belong to him.
Victor Cuevas is right now behind bars in Fort Bend County, Texas. He's accused of evading arrest for possessing a tiger. Earlier this week, people in a Houston neighborhood were absolutely stunned when a tiger sauntered across the street. A sheriff's deputy held the tiger at bay.
You cannot have a tiger in the city of Houston. So right there's a violation.
Houston police are now looking for the tiger. They say the tiger was living in a home rented by Victor Cuevas, and that Cuevas took the tiger back to his house, and a man later put the tiger in a vehicle and drove away with it. So why exactly did Cuevas have a tiger?
That is a $100,000 question.
Cuevas's lawyer says he had plans for Cuevas to surrender to Houston police, but Houston officers swooped in and arrested Cuevas anyway for evading arrest.
I got a bad taste in my mouth for Houston police being, sneaky and dirty and double-crossing me when we were trying to help.
Cuevas faces a murder charge in another county. Attorney Mike Elliott says Cuevas acted in self-defense in that case. He says Cuevas doesn't actually own the tiger, whose name is India.
Bottom line is, though, the tiger is not his. The tiger belongs to an individual named DeAndre.
This isn't the first time people have noticed animals at the house that Cuevas rents.
We have reports that he does have monkeys. Monkeys are not illegal to have in the city of Houston if they're under 30 pounds. We believe he has 2 of those.
Victor Cuevas will be back in court in Fort Bend County later this week. At that time, prosecutors will ask to revoke his bail in that case. For Law&Crime Daily, I'm Angenette Levy.
Thanks, Angenette. Back one last time is Dave Ehrenberg and Terri Austin. Dave, it doesn't seem like Houston's monkeying around here, but as a prosecutor in Florida, I'm sure you're no stranger to exotic animals in your cases. What do you think of the prosecution's case here?
They need more evidence to tie him to the missing tiger. And, Brian, when I saw this story, I had to look again to make sure it wasn't in Florida. It sure sounds like a Florida story. Are you sure this was Texas? I also had to look at my calendar because this definitely seemed like a 2020 story. It's so bizarre. And when I was reading about this story, I saw Carol Baskin from Tiger King was featured as like an expert. Just when you thought the apocalypse wasn't upon us, you see Carol Baskin as a legal expert. So yeah, I think the prosecution needs more evidence before they can charge her. Besides, this guy is being accused of murder in another county, and that's going to be a much more serious crime. Lastly, the fact that Carol Baskin was mentioned in all of this shows that there's always a Florida connection to everything.
Exactly. Great point there. Terri, the defense is arguing that Cuevas was merely a good Samaritan who found the cat. It's not his cat. I know you're a cat lover. Does the defense make sense to you?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm a cat lover. I take care of my family pets. But in any event, as far as this cat is concerned, interestingly enough, you can own a dangerous cat in Texas. You just have to have about $100,000 in liability insurance. You have to make sure you register the cat. You have to make sure that you have a cage big enough to fit the cat, and it has to be in the cage. So Cuevas could still get in trouble for having the cat outside. And by the way, Brian, the statute says that even if you don't own the cat, if you control and you have custody, you could still be liable. So I think saying that Cuevas is not the owner is not going to get him out of trouble here. The cat should have been behind a cage and been protected, obviously, from the public, and the public protected from the cat. So I think that he does still face some exposure here.
All right, so we got to double check and make sure this case is not actually in Florida. I think we can confirm this in Texas, and of course those other elements as well. Dave, Terri, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us here at Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.